Ready to begin?
Better be.
Hey, let's have some.
Welcome, everyone, to the April 28th City Council work session. We have a very interesting and important topic on the city and county partnership tonight. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll turn it over to Sarah for her presentation. I'd like to also welcome Alicia Hayes to the table, who's the interim CAO for the county, as she's been a great partner as we move forward with this possibility. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm Sarah Maderi, Assistant City Manager and Planning and Development Director, and I probably am going to have the window tapped behind me, aren't I? While the farmers market has been in existence for close to 100 years, my work with the market really started in some kind of earnest about 2010, and it was at that time that we had been authorized to spend up to $500,000 on permanent infrastructure improvements to the market to improve its accessibility, to improve its image, and to continue to generate lots of users into the downtown. At that time, we invited a group of community members that we called the Farmers Market Improvement Committee to come together and help advise staff on what kinds of things we should be looking at to improve the market. And at the end of your PowerPoint presentation, there's actually a list of the people that were on that committee. We had anticipated that the group would start talking about ways to leverage the funds, maybe thinking about improvements such as covers and other things that would happen right there next to the butterfly lot to make the place easier to access and nicer to see, which is kind of an awkward statement. But what ended up happening was the conversation really became about needing more space. It was really, they cited a lot of issues with accessibility, especially for those that elderly that had difficulty walking through the crowds, wheelchairs, people with strollers. That's really very crowded. This picture was actually taken this past Saturday, so you can see those conditions have continued to grow since 2010. What ended up happening was discussion about closing 8th Street, and some of you might remember there was a lot of communications around the time about should we or should we not close 8th Street, which was seen as a benefit to the farmers market and seen as a risk to some of the other businesses, and very specifically to the Saturday market. So at that time, we kept trying to explore options, and what the group had kind of collectively said as I met with them individually and together was the best outcome for both would be to be able to expand onto the butterfly lot. This isn't a new concern, nor is this a new idea for this location. In 1915, when the first farmers market was opened, it was opened right along the edge of the butterfly lot on Park Street. It was opened at the time, there were 22 vendors, and you drew a numbered tag out of a box to determine where you fell out in the shed to make sure nobody had a competitive advantage over anybody else. One of the things that has come out of these discussions has been this book called Market Days, which I have here, and we've tried to find other copies. This book was published in 1969 and talks about the history of the public market in Eugene, and really kind of goes through and talks about the heavy lift that it took and the amount of community conversations to get to a place where the market could open in this location. There was a great quote in there that I just wanted to say. It was a community member before they voted to do this. "We must have better markets for the products of the farms around Eugene. We should have a fixed day every week on which the farmer can come to town, park his cart, and sell the things which he has raised." The market was a huge success and continued to grow over the next decade. In fact, it grew so much that in 1929 there were a new proposal to make a more substantial market on the side of the butterfly market, on the side of the butterfly lot. As you can see there was already on that location a covered area. So some talk about the future of potentially having a covered market, and there actually was one there before. But at the time that they were talking about this more substantial structure, Judge Barnard at the time, cited two concerns. One was that everyone needed to understand that this site could be reclaimed for county use at any time, and he felt that the community needed the property for park purposes. In 2014, the challenge of maintaining that space for county purposes is still a very active discussion. And specifically, the butterfly lot has been talked about a site for potentially the future courthouse. The existing courthouse was built in 1957, and several independent studies have identified significant deficiencies related to its security, the building systems, building code, and the ability to run a court in the way that you need to be able to do so now. So here's the butterfly lot as it is now and could be potentially the home for the future court. This land has been held for county purposes since Eugene and Mary Skinner first donated the property to the county. In fact, Eugene and Mary Skinner donated 40 acres north of 8th Street, though it wasn't 8th Street yet, and Charnel Mulligan donated 40 acres to the south of 8th Street. And the county looked at all of that property and located the parks and some of the county buildings right there in the middle of it, and then proceeded to sell the rest to fund county projects. So, out of this history and some of our current work in downtown and with our partners, an opportunity has emerged that could present a new solution to a 100-year challenge. This has really come from the discussions that we are having about replacing City Hall and the phased approach that we have been taking with the block. As you know from your last meeting with the design consultants and design team, Phase 1 of City Hall leaves room for future possibilities and partnerships within the block. We've talked about it being Phase 1 and Phase 2, but there's also a lot of unknowns about who would really occupy the rest of that block if City Hall doesn't eventually take it all. The idea emerging continues to be, is there space actually to do all of these things? And could we, and that's kind of hard to see, you can kind of see the city-owned City Hall lot on the right and the county-owned Butterfly lot on the left. And could we exchange properties so that the county would have half of the City Hall block and we would take ownership of the Butterfly lot? That's one possibility, and I put it up here just so we have a place to start the discussions. This builds on our partnership with the county through a land exchange that would allow space for the farmers market to grow now and in the future and potentially develop a year-round market, space for the courthouse to relocate, continued development of 8th Street as a great civic street that connects downtown to the Willamette River. And then I'm just going to add this in, that while the courthouse sharing a block with City Hall may be a new idea, and I say may because there's been so many ideas that have been floated in the last 99 years, it's possible it's been floated before. In 2006, the concept of bringing back the park to the Butterfly lot was a significant element of the Eugene Park Block's master plan study, which had significant involvement from lots of different people that were neighbors, city staff, and county staff. Today's work session is really just an opportunity to introduce the concept, see how much you would like to talk about it, see if we want to pursue this partnership opportunity with the county, and find out what kinds of questions and concerns you might have going forward. And I'll end with the last, another quote from the book. We have been trying for a long time to break down old barriers and show that we are true friends of the people who live in the country around Eugene. A public market will cement the city and county together, and for both will provide a good business proposition. And with that, I'll just leave it open for questions and other comments if you have others to add.
I just want to thank everybody who's been in the conversation, and I just want to say I'm happy to have what for me has been a long anticipated discussion of expanding the farmers market and finding a way to do that in a way that works is very promising to me. So, and I have a copy of the book if anybody would like me to loan it to them. Anybody? Yes.
Thanks, Mayor. How would this interface with the Obie development that's upcoming in terms of the commercial aspects of that vis-a-vis the commercial aspects of
I'm not
doing this?
Thank you, Councilman. I'm not sure exactly how we'll interface. I do know that Mr. Obie had suggested the market might be a possibility at his project. We've talked to Mr. Obie, and that had kind of been moved off the table a number of months ago. So, I mean, in terms of commerce downtown, that would interface, but not in particular in a certain way with that development that I know of right now. John?
I can also say I had an opportunity to talk with Brian last week about this topic, and I'll just confirm, as Alicia has mentioned, at one time, his development did include a farmer's market, and looking forward or towards that, subsequent to that time, and even, I think, before this became a heightened reality, I think they had moved away from that concept a bit and have looked at some other opportunities for their development. One of the things that is a positive, I think, for his development as well as this is it does make a nice connection from 5th Street through this particular Parks block and into the rest of the downtown, and eventually, as Sarah mentioned, as a part of a significant pathway from downtown over to the e-website as well. And so it actually creates some nice hubs around the downtown and nodes, and this in some ways plays a kind of a central piece to that as we move forward. So.
Okay, I've got Claire, and then I think I've got George Brown, right?
Well, as many in the community, I think this is a really promising proposal. It's pretty exciting to see some movement on this question. I know the farmers market has felt very bottled up for a number of years, maybe even decades. And it's my understanding that this idea was endorsed by the farmers market board. Is that true? Can you confirm that?
I can't confirm the exact boards and committees that have endorsed it, but I know that last year when I was working with the market, when this whole discussion of 5th Street came up, they took a vote of their membership and everybody agreed, and you can correct me if I'm wrong back there, but agreed that the butterfly lot would always be their first and primary location. And I think there's been a number of people on the site selection committee that have been meeting with community members and meeting with different elected officials and talking to numbers of people about how they would like to stay in downtown on the butterfly lot.
So assuming that the Blaine County Farmers Market, supports this idea, I think it's definitely worth pursuing. In terms of technical details, one question I would want to explore is, would we actually have to change over ownership of the properties, or could there just be an agreement for swapping the use of while retaining the current ownership structure and not actually deeding each other the different lands? I have some interest in that City Hall block staying within city ownership and not splitting it in half in terms of who actually owns the property. So that'd be something I'd want to look at further. But in terms of concept, I think it's great, and I'm really glad to have this coming forward to the council.
Okay, George Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is really interesting and a very promising development. But I do have a big-time problem with the suggested motion. Part B, I'm fine with Part 1. Part B says that we identify secure property for the future courthouse development on the City Hall lot. That's the problem. We have worked so hard, and past councils have worked so hard on figuring out what to do with our City Hall. And the council direction is clear. It's to rebuild on the City Hall site and reconsolidate all the currently scattered city departments around town when the leases run out, or when we can assemble the money to actually, build the project. The municipal court, public works, human resources, central services, and planning and development. The idea, council's direction, correct me if I'm wrong, was to move everybody back to the City Hall site. If we give half that site to the county, if we swap, it really limits our options. We spent about $3.5 million to Thomas Hacker for a big community process, came up with all kinds of plans. It led nowhere. We're paying Roll Brokaw $750,000 for the work that they've done and will do to, finish the design for Phase 1. If we reduce our footprint by half, that means that when we do our reconsolidation, whenever we assemble the money, come up with the plans, we're going to have to go up. We're going to have to go up taller. It'll probably be a 2 or 3 story building as is without this. We're going to be reducing the footprint of the reconsolidation, and it's going to cost many millions of dollars more to go up and reconsolidate our city hall, that's our council direction. Then there's, the problem of parking, where are those cars as a butterfly lot going to go? If you proceed with the idea of building the county courthouse on our city hall site, where's their parking going to be? Where's our parking going to be for city hall? We got to think this thing through, and by saying that we're going to locate, do the land swap on the city hall site, we're really limiting our options, and we're really, and we're muddying the waters here with identifying that lot. We finally achieved some clarity after all these years about what we're going to do with the new city hall. I'll need another round, Mayor.
Okay, before I call on Chris, Mike, and George Polling, I don't know if we have it with us, or if anybody in the room has with us the motion that council made about the use of the city property for the city hall. Because I don't want to leave that just sitting the way that I just heard it. Because I think we always had an option there that part of the lot could be used for a partnership with somebody other than ourselves. So I just want to
we can find the motion. As I recall, the motion, not specifically by wording, it talks about pursuing a phase 1 on the site, and then it does not specifically say we will consolidate into the future, but we do want to ensure that the opportunity is there to consolidate into the future. And I think and Sarah can talk to this a little bit more, as we pursued this potential opportunity, we actually have looked at whether or not a consolidated city hall could continue on the site, even with the courthouse as a part of that footprint, and the answer is yes. And so I don't know if you want to talk about that. We can also see if we can find a copy of that as we're continuing through the meeting.
Chris?
Thank you. I think it's an interesting discussion, interesting opportunity, and I do think where we want to be at this point is to hear what the concerns might be, hear what the questions might be, and also hear what the opportunities might be. I think it's back to the notion of what are we risking and what are the potential rewards. And I think really what folks are concerned about in terms of what we're risking is, are we giving up something? Or are we changing direction from what we have stated where we wanted to go? And I always felt City Hall should be on that block. But I think with the conversations we've had with the architects and others, we've reached the point where Phase 1 is still on track. Phase 1 will still happen the way we have asked for Phase 1. But we didn't really know for sure what we wanted to do with the rest. We have talked about using it for other purposes, for building the rest of City Hall or consolidating this or that. I don't think consolidation means the same thing today that it did back when it was first talked about. Consolidation back then was the police department, the fire department, and every department of the city would all be consolidated in one building. Obviously, that's not going to happen. So what does consolidation mean today? We're going to try to consolidate as much as we can. That's what our subcommittee looked at, is what the different square footage requirements for that consolidation would be. I think even so, if we consolidated up to the amount that we talked about in the committee, you could still accomplish that, granted on a taller half lot, but you could accomplish it on a half lot. In fact, this council voted to build a half block City Hall when we were going to go to Rock and Rodeo. Remember that? And then we found out we wanted to build a half lot there, but Rock and Rodeo didn't want to sell us the property. But the intent was still to say it's possible to do. Now, I'm not looking at this as isolated stuff. I'm also considering the fact that there may be a partnership opportunity in us building the City Hall we're already envision building, linked with a courthouse that's close to the federal courthouse. It's thinking of partnership not just in terms of a city presence that's totally separate from a county presence, but we still get what we want, they could still get what they want, but the real plus is it could be a win for the farmers market. We've been talking about farmers market for a lot of years, and at one time we talked about putting it as part of City Hall. I couldn't go for that. But this may actually be an opportunity for us to put a farmers market where it's more appropriate to be, and still have a partnership opportunity, we talk a lot about partnerships, where we could have the city hall we've already decided we want. It could be in partnership with a county courthouse. There's still room to do the rest of what we want to do, but there's also many more opportunities available for us. So I don't think we're restricting ourselves too much, but we're potentially creating a huge opportunity for the farmers market. So, yeah, I'm still weighing the pros and cons, but for me, those are the elements that are noodling around for me.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure I can support the proposed motion that's in our AIS, because for me it has a cart before the horse sort of feeling for me. I agree with much of what's been said here. When we served on the City Hall subcommittee, I had some other thoughts about what I thought was the wiser way to go, and as most people know, I've advocated for an expanded farmers market for quite a long while. I think that's one of the things that works in our downtown, works well, brings people here, and we ought to make a great deal more of it. As a matter of fact, I think the wisest use of our current City Hall building is to leave it standing and reform it internally to be the farmers market. I think that's the wisest use of that facility and of our property. But again, I lost that argument, so I'll stop beating that horse someday. I'm not entirely closed to the idea here, but this asks us to begin to prepare plans and timelines for something we have absolutely no concept of what it will cost. I think George Brown is right. I think that we have always talked about in our subcommittee the idea that, okay, fine, if we're going to stay on that particular piece of real estate, we're going to consolidate. We talked about all the different phases of that. There are 3 or 4 different phases that involve different square footages that could all be accomplished on that property. But once we start to get up above 2 or 3 stories in height, especially with the issue of parking, then the costs start to really become something. So I don't have a clear enough notion yet of what we're talking about to complete this vision that we've been talking about for so long. How do we get City Hall and all the city's functions consolidated on that property, add the county courthouse facilities, and not have it be prohibitively expensive? That's the question I don't have the answer to. When I understand, hey, we can actually afford to do all this stuff, as cool as it would be, then I'd be a little more comfortable with developing proposals and timelines. But I have real questions about our ability to afford that reality just now. I think it's nice, and I wouldn't stand in the way if we could. I still think our wiser option is to make better use of the options and assets that we have available to us.
George Poling?
Sir, could you pull up slide 11, please?
Can you just remind me which one that was?
That one. Okay, currently, I know we're at the very first of a bunch of baby steps on this process, but can you give me an idea about what part of that property would be used if this goes forward?
So what we asked the team to do is take a quick look at the space that's available on the Butterfly lot and the space that's available on City Hall lot to see if, given our program for Phase 1 and the program we anticipate for Phase 2, would we be able to, is it technically possible? Because we didn't want to bring an item to you that we didn't think on some level was technically possible. And so what's probably a better, I'm not sure if this, I'm not sure how the pointer works or not. Does anybody know how this, oh, there we go. So I'm going to slide forward one slide again right here, because another good description is, this is kind of this half block is kind of the pattern language of downtown. And so what we looked at is, could we have a City Hall over here, a shared space entry for that and a court here that would meet kind of the design standards for the deal. They just did some basic sketch and numbers, and what it appeared was that you could actually have a pretty nice, prominent city hall on this area, have space for phase 2. That would fit within the program we have now. What it would mean is that our previous look was trying to really I'm sorry. This. It's an interesting building. Our program that we did now really tried to take advantage of City Hall on 8th Street to the greatest extent possible because we didn't know what the future development was going to be. What this would do is it would have potentially, and we could bring back more drawings and things in the future for you to look at. We just wanted to make sure you wanted to have the conversation, is that you would have City Hall on this section and the courthouse on this section. So you would have an 8th Street civic presence the whole way, and so City Hall wouldn't need to cross this mid-block line in the way that we have it right now. So it's technically possible. The design team includes the group, Miller Hole has done some courthouse construction, so they have some ideas of what works. And I thought, based on my conversations as recently as Friday, they thought it could be a really exciting block.
Thank you. Well, the way I look at this whole process is, first of all, the major goal, and it's a very important goal, is to establish a permanent residence for the farmers market. As it is now, as that photograph shows, there's a lot of people that I know that can't go down there because of the amount of people. So we need to continue working on that. I'm just glad to see that the city and the county are finally willing to work on partnerships and consolidations and whatever you want to call it, because in the past there's not been that. I mean, the subjects have been brought up and it's just been a flat wall go up and say, no, we're not going to even talk about it. So it's been a long time in coming, and I'm glad to see that's finally starting to happen. And the way I look at this motion, this is just a starting point. I mean, you can't say, yes, let's go forward without knowing what you're going forward with. And I think by going through the process proposed by the motion, it gives our staff the authority and the ability to work with county staff to work out all these details, if it's feasible, if it's technically possible, if there's enough room on there. And we won't know those questions, answer those questions, unless we move forward on this. You know, whether we do it or not at the end of the process, who knows? It may not be able to work out, but how are you going to know unless you go through the process? So I'm willing to start this conversation, but I'm going to hold reservations on if it's going to work or not until we get the information back.
Betty?
Thank you. First, as I remember the motion that council passed, and we all have different memories, I guess, I remember that we said to retain the council chamber and the parking and as much of the current city hall as possible. And we seem to have lost track of that somewhere along the way. Also, going backwards, I can share my wishes from the past, as Mike did. All along, I wish that we would repair and rehabilitate the current city hall as a city hall. I've always thought it should stay next to the county building because there is a relationship. That seems to be a lost cause. Also, when the fire department left, I don't think we ever talked in recent years about bringing the fire department back. When they left, I thought we would use that space to bring some other departments back, but that never happened. What we were told then was that it wasn't usable. Even though people had been living there and using it, it turned out suddenly it wasn't usable. What I'm hearing so far, since people are starting to hear about this possible plan, is the farmers are very happy, and the people who go to the farmers market, everybody wants the farmers market to continue to be successful and to expand. I've been asked, why would the city give up that much space? And I think that's something we need to consider. We need to hear lots of people's ideas, and I think any objections that people have should be considered, and we should look at them carefully. I'm very skeptical about talking about in the future we'll build onto something. I remember the current city hall was supposed to be, part of it was supposed to be available for another story, and the old library I know was supposed to be built so that they could build up, and it turned out not to be true. Unfortunately, a lot of the departments are now in long-term leased spaces, which I don't think is a good thing, but they are. I'm willing to have a public hearing and listen to people, but I'm not. Another thing I wanted to say at the time, if we did end up doing this, and the county wouldn't be ready to build probably for many years, the other part could be used for a community garden, which is something I think we ought to be doing with all available temporarily empty spaces, actually. Thank you.
So before I go to round two, I've got Mike and Clara in the queue, and Chris and George Brown. I'd just like to make the comment that I appreciated what George Polling said, because this is to say, are you interested in going ahead with a discussion? And it is a moment in time that we've never had before. We have the possibility of having an expansion of the farmers market on the Butterfly lot, which is the preferred spot by the farmers market. It has been for a long, long time, and it's never been available before. This is the first time we've even been able to have that conversation at all, and we have some willingness on the part of the county to have that conversation and so I think this ask today is not for you to make up your mind. It's for you to be, are you open to having the discussion, to getting the information, to see if the county and the city can find a way to make this happen for the whole community, and is it in our interest to do that? So that's sort of the question, I think, before you today, and I guess I would caution you to not make it more complicated than it has to be right now. You are being asked to consider a sort of a switch of a trade of equal land. That's what you're being asked for. It's that simple. So, Mike.
Thank you. I'll start deconstructing pieces of this that might be helpful to your questions. Number one, I have never been in favor of and will never be in favor of the city giving up title to any portion of this block, ever. We should own it forever. We may have an opportunity to put use of it to a partner's end and find good partnerships to use it, but this square block should never leave the city's ownership, in my opinion. When I wanted to do City Hall in the other location there at EWEB, I still thought that the city should retain ownership of this block. And I wouldn't want that to be a part. Mr. Manager, would you tell me what point B means here when it said would identify and secure property for future courthouse? That's the one that's giving me trouble. What does secure property mean?
I think really when it comes down to the ability to free up the Butterfly lot, there needs to be a location identified and secured. And by secure, I mean in the same way that you feel strongly that the city should always own City Hall. I think that the county and the courts feel that they don't. They're going to need a place that they know is going to be theirs for future development in the same way. And so to give up rights to something, they'll want to gain rights to something. And so if you look around kind of that sort of core of what you would consider the county seat, there's not very many properties that are of the size to be able to do that. The City Hall lot could do that, and it is certainly a change. It's a different direction. It's a creative solution, and is not without complications, but it presents perhaps an opportunity that you may not have again.
Well, I appreciate the county's flexibility. I certainly appreciate the court's flexibility as well, as I know this is kind of a new path for them as well, and the judge in terms of, and the presiding judge in terms of being open to this opportunity, and I appreciate that. I'm open to it in the sense of the way the mayor presented it. As an investigation of more information, sure. As an opportunity to discuss the potential for what this might look like, absolutely. But to make any particular agreement that secures a right for them, I'm not interested in doing that at this time until there are more details, especially around where that leaves us in with costs for completing our vision of a complete City Hall. So if we can reword this motion in such a way that it adequately reflects what the mayor just mentioned about us seeking more information and investigating, then I could support that.
And I'll just add a couple of comments on here. I think what this really talks about, I think it gets at the intent of what the mayor talks about. What this doesn't say is we're going to secure the property in any particular legal fashion. There are a variety of legal ways to actually do that. What this really does say is go develop some things to include potential deal points, which really is an investigation of various options and how do you actually achieve an outcome that we're trying to achieve. It doesn't presuppose a particular legal mechanism for getting there. So that would be one piece of that. So I think it does get at the intent of what the mayor is trying to, or what the mayor articulated. The other piece is we can try to provide some costs when we come back about the future of Phase 2, and I have the motion that I can read when you're ready, Mayor, but as a completed package for City Hall, so we can come back with potential costs. One of the caveats on that will be is regardless of how much property is available, the ultimate cost will determined based on what the final design is. And so we could have an entire block that actually costs more for City Hall than a half block, just depending on how we choose to design that. And so I understand the importance of the cost in the future, but it's based on what the council at that time decides they want as a part of their City Hall.
Alicia?
Thank you, Mayor and council folks. I want to just share with you how enjoyable it has been. You talk about the city and the county working together. How enjoyable it has been to work with your staff and getting in a room and really putting that creativity to work and thinking about the possibilities, what ifs. And that's really what's in front of you today, what if. And we, as staff, talk about it, and then we've got to kind of bring it out in the light. We've got to see what it really looks like and what our community thinks about that. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock, a time certain, I'll be taking this same proposal to the Board of County Commissioners. We haven't got their buy-off either. So as you're talking about it, know that that elected body as well is going to have a chance to talk about it and grapple with it. And what we're asking for is a chance to hear from our community and see if this is the right place to go. And then we absolutely have to fill in those details. And there are a lot of details. Now, somebody said we're this far on the political and we're this far on the details. And I think that's the way it needs to go. And I'm excited to present this again to the county commissioners, and hopefully they'll give me the head nods, the okay, to take it further and to see what we can do in terms of reality around this.
I've got Claire, Chris, George Brown, Greg, and George Poole.
Thank you. So, yeah, considering some of the other conversations we've had about how to use the whole City Hall lot, I've heard suggestions of allowing private development on the lot for retail, office space, housing. I am much more supportive of the idea of sharing the space with another public agency like the county. I think that's much more appropriate for public land. And again, reiterating, I'd like us, just as Councilor Clark said, to retain ownership of the land if that could be part of the agreement. I think I would be much more likely to support the ultimate decision if that were the case, rather than selling it. And, given that we cannot build on the entire lot, even if that was what we wanted to do, I think pursuing this idea in the way that Councilor Polling suggested, even with the questions raised, that's what we want to answer as we look into this further, is what are those sticking points, what are the things that might make it not happen, rather than deciding right now that those things are going to make it not happen. And presumably we might even see some revenue that would help offset the cost of building our City Hall in this process, potentially. The farmers market is a vital economic asset that could thrive exponentially further than it has been if it were able to accommodate more vendors, and there are more vendors who want to get in there, and more customers, and we know there are more customers who want to get in there. So from my vantage point, this idea, of this swap is the most viable one we've seen for trying to make that happen for many, many years. So I'm very much in favor of passing the motion that's before us tonight and getting more details, more cost analysis, more information about some of the sticking points. And passing this motion does not commit us to any future action other than getting more information and having more discussion.
And so George Brown?
Was Chris not next?
Did
you cross me off?
I guess I did. I got ahead of myself. Sorry. Go ahead. Thank you, George.
Thanks. Thanks, George.
Got Greg in there, too.
In figuring out what are the elements that can make this as comfortable as possible for us to move forward. And what I'm hearing is, as long as we understand this is just kind of that first step, I think people's comfort level really comes back into play. We don't want to move too fast. As you say, there's a lot of moving parts here, and if you move too fast, parts can slip between the cracks and fall down, and then the whole thing blows up. So we want to move at the speed that we're all comfortable moving at, and I think the way we're now talking about it is a much more comfortable speed for us. Because of the complexity, it would be easy for this thing to get really hard to understand. And so we want to try to make sure that as we move at the right speed, we can do it so that we understand how each part interconnects with the other parts. I'm not convinced that the dots are changing. It's how we're drawing the lines between them. I don't think that we have really changed what our intentions are. We're just looking at how we could put those intentions together, perhaps in a different way. But that's going to take a fair amount of exploring to see if we can actually draw that line, and I want to take the time to do that. That then lends itself to the scope. Are we talking about something that's huge, or are we talking about something that is much more manageable? I don't want this thing to get blown out of scope by beginning to plan, something that's much bigger than we really need to talk about. So with all of those reasons in mind, I still think we need to move forward, but we need to really send the signal that we're moving forward at a speed that really works for us. When it's time to put the motion on the table, I think just to ensure there's no confusion or ambiguity, I think I would just leave out the word secure property, because I know what you say you mean by it, but other people can interpret the word secure as mean purchase. And I don't think it changes the substance of what you really want if we say identify property, because that is still consistent with the timeline we're now talking about. It doesn't really change anything in terms of what I think this council wants to continue moving forward. So I'll propose to make the motion with that one thing left out, and I think it could really elicit a lot more support and more comfort from us, because I am also interested in going forward, but at the speed that works, with the level of complexity that we can explain to folks, and they can understand exactly what we're talking about here, and then the degree to which this conforms to what our values and our intentions are, and make sure those are still in place and not being changed. Then I think we can move forward.
Okay, now George Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the plans for the new City Hall were finally beginning to coalesce in a reasonably coherent fashion. And the idea, certainly with council's intent was to reconsolidate the departments in one location. Or I mean, are we always just going to pay rent for the municipal court, or pay rent for human resources, and we're going to pay rent for, the ones we're paying rent on? The library is going to eventually take the fourth floor, and central services is going to have to go somewhere. Are we going to rent space somewhere at another location downtown? I mean, the intent was certainly to reconsolidate, and this proposal does not make it simpler. It really complicates things even more and throws thing out into la-la land, and so reducing the city's footprint on that block will only lead to bad results. It's going to cost a lot more to reconsolidate on that block. That's quite clear. They'll have to go up several stories more. I personally think it's a really bad idea. And really, throughout our whole discussions about City Hall, we never considered the county's courthouse needs. That never came up. That was never part of our discussion, nor should it be. We're thinking about our City Hall. And I'm not speaking against the farmers market here, but the farmers market's needs never came up, or only very peripherally during our discussions about City Hall. I feel that the county can build its courthouse somewhere else, and the farmers market can still expand on that lot. This doesn't preclude any of that. I'm going to when the motion gets made, I will make a motion to amend the main motion. We really cannot have the City Hall footprint as part of the discussion about the courthouse. We limit our options, we don't expand our options. We shrink our options. We make it much more complicated. Many more months of study, and, well, what if this? And we're actually, well, I'll speak to that when I listen to another round, and when the motion gets made, I will make a motion to amend it.
Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction. You guys can think I'm kind of crazy anyway, but for me, the bottom line is, what's the end game? What's the vision for downtown? And how does, this partnership interface with a longer-term vision? I want to know what this is going to look like in 25, 30, 50 years, and how that is going to ultimately play out into the vitality of downtown, the purpose of us having, government located basically on the same block. Ultimately, what are we, going to end up with, and is this going to be feasible and functional for the, future generations that are going to have to live with it? Because, again, we're talking about, we're moving from one conversation, as Betty and George talked about, to another conversation, which I'm not opposed to. I think we should explore all of the options that are available, but I think we need to explore that within the context of a real vision, which right now I see pieces of the vision going along the riverfront and other places, but I don't see a comprehensive overall vision that says, this is where we're going, this is what downtown Eugene is going to look like, and this is how it's going to be functional for the entire city in the long run.
George Poling?
Thank you. I guess during these discussions, when we're talking about the courthouse, we're not talking about the public service building part of the Lane County facility. We're just talking about the old part of the facility that's the sheriff has used for years, that the courts used for years. So it's not like we're discussing moving everything you see for the county government over there. It's just the courthouse. And if you're building courthouses, you might as well build an extra room for the city court also, the municipal court. So, that the conversation also about whenever I've talked to anybody about the City Hall complex, I've always said that we need to not only consider building out, but up. And up is primarily where this entire city is looking at building based on our goals. We're talking about density, commercial density, residential density, and the only way you can do that is go up. So, if we're telling other people they have to do it, then I suppose we need to do it ourselves. And then, George, I'll agree with you. We've never considered the courthouse needs in any of our discussions about City Hall, but part of that reason is because we've never been at the point that we are now where the city government and the county government are willing to sit down and discuss this. It's always been, no, we don't want to talk to you about it. Since I've been on the council, one of the things that I've always advocated for is consolidation of services. And in the past, it's always been, we don't want to play. So, I see this as we're maybe making a step forward and opening the door to more communications on better ways that the city and the county governments can work together to accomplish the goals. And an important thing, the last two lines of the proposed motion, unless I'm reading this wrong, is the very first step in this process is being a joint public hearing before the county board and city council on the concept.
That's right.
That's where we're going to get the ideas. That's where we're going to get the input to give staff a starting point. Okay, now that we've got ideas from the public on what they want, this is what we have. How can we mold these two together to come up with something that works? And again, like I said, if we come up with something that works, good. If we don't, we tried. We tried. And at this point in time is the best time we've ever had to make this step forward. And I think if we don't move on it, I think we'll regret it for years and years to come.
So, I just want to say that I think that the goal of this is that we want this to be a good deal for everybody. A good deal for the county and a good deal for the city. And it has to, and I am sure the county is going to be just as pointed about what they think is in their interests as we are about ours. So I think we're going to try to find, if it moves forward, to try to find the sweet spot for all of us. And I also wanted to say in response to Greg that we actually do have a downtown plan. I don't know if you've got a copy of it, and it morphs a little bit, but basically has where we think the great streets are and how we think we're going to connect downtown to the river. And actually, I do believe that this idea of an expanded farmers market fits right into making this a vibrant street here. So I think that part fits into our community vision and giving ourselves a chance. The thing that's different right now is, for years we couldn't, excuse me guys, but I'm going to say that, farmers markets folk didn't necessarily agree with each other over the direction they wanted to go. We've got that seems to go now. We've got a willingness to talk about the property. That's not happened before. So, and we've got a potential for to help us do the things we want to do, both for the county and the city. So this is a different moment. The reason you haven't talked about it like this before is that we've never had a moment like this before. This is it. This is just the time that never came before, where you could talk about all those things you've been saying, gee, I wish we could do this and I wish we could do that, and we've never been able to do it before. So I don't know whether we'll get there or not, but it's certainly worth the effort to try, because I think almost everyone around this table at one time or the other, I've heard them say that they think the farmers market is a jewel of our community and has so much to do with the vibrancy of our downtown, and has so much to do with our food localization and our economic efforts around food. I mean, it just fits so many things that we care about, and so it's worth working on. We may fail, but it's worth working on.
Want a motion?
Yes.
I move to direct the city manager to work with the county to develop a proposed process, timeline, and deal points that A, would enable the preservation and future development of the Lane County Farmers Market on the Butterfly Lot, and B, would identify property for the future courthouse development on the City Hall lot, with the first step in that process being a joint public hearing before the county board and the city council on the concept.
Second.
Moved and seconded. George.
Mayor, I'm going to introduce an amendment to that motion.
All right.
If I get a second, I will discuss it.
Okay.
I move to amend the recent motion starting at, start in B. The A part is the same. B, would identify and secure property for the future courthouse development on any city property other than the City Hall lot. If I get a second, I'll discuss it.
Seconded.
All right. This keeps our City Hall rebuild on track and in focus. We're somewhat in focus. We're pretty much on track. If we switch that with the county, it throws it all into terrible confusion. It does not simplify our options. This amendment actually doesn't limit our options, which the unamended does, limit our options severely. You go from half a block down to a quarter of a block. Or actually less. It's terribly limiting. It actually reduces the number of jigsaw pieces in the jigsaw puzzle to move our City Hall forward. That's our main. We got to keep that in mind. That's our main focus. These other things are peripheral to our development and reconsolidation of City Hall in that block. The county's courthouse location, pardon me, it's really not our problem. Our municipal court is a problem. It's a satellite post now. We'd like to move it back to City Hall. I don't believe that the county's courthouse location should enter the mix of our considerations about our City Hall. It doesn't prejudice in any way the viability of the farmers market on the Butterfly Lot or on any other county or city-owned property. It doesn't limit that at all. I totally support the idea of a farmer's market, but not at the expense of having half of our development site given over to the county. I think that would be a terrible mistake. That's why I'm making this amendment. Thank you.
Ready to vote on this motion, amendment? All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It goes down. We're back to the main motion. Further discussion, Mike?
I just had another couple of questions that are tangential to this discussion before we move on to the next topic. And I can understand the wisdom of us getting more consolidation done with this plan by perhaps getting an more inexpensive new municipal court here rather than across town. So that makes some sense to me. When we build on this particular lot, if we build, for example, with new court facilities there, how are we getting around the FAR requirements that we impose on others building nearby?
We have not explored the technical issues with building it to that extent. That would be something we would need to look at as part of this process.
But what I mean is, across the street, do I have it correctly that the FAR, the floor area ratio, is 2.0 across the street still?
I'm not sure what that is, Mike. I don't know that off the top of my head.
I'm fairly certain it is. It's always been interesting to me, so that's one of the things I'm going to want to understand when we get into this process of what we're building, is how we're complying as a municipality with the requirements that we expect from others and making sure that we're on equal footing. Secondly, I was wondering of Alicia, I heard a fella talk one time, an architect that I think's in the room here, speak one time about the parking lot and the surface lot that's behind the state facility, that's the county's. That underground parking was built with the intention that at one point in the future it would have 2 or 3 or 4 stories built on top of it. Now my question is that still structurally possible, and does the county have any kind of plans in that regard, or to have conversations about potential future use and building of that space?
Thank you, Councilman. I always appreciate that you ask me questions about architecture and engineering. I'd like to point out I have a BS in education, so this will be really fun. I know that there are plans. I actually chatted with that architect. I know that there's a cost. We don't have plans right now. We're in the beginning stages, just as you are. Like I said, my county commissioners haven't even heard the depth of conversation you've had this evening. They get that tomorrow. Is it a possibility? It could be. It absolutely could be. There's so many possibilities about how to do underground parking with, parks over them. And we just don't know because we haven't explored, because we just had the idea and we wanted to bring it out for this kind of in-depth conversation and scrutiny and possibilities, kind of bring it out into the light, if you will.
Well, I just wanted to bring up, with as much as happening in and around that area and what we're talking about here, I hope that's discussed and brought up also as another parcel where we might add, say, parking to the downtown area in some way if something is constructed there. Lastly, I'd like to say I appreciate very much your willingness to work with staff and to work together on this idea so quickly and to bring us this opportunity to discuss it so quickly. I'll look forward to more co-ventures of such great cooperation. We asked the manager just recently to start working as quickly as possible with you on the issues of how to deal with homelessness on a more regional basis, so I expect we'll see you back at the table real soon. Talk about how we're going to work together with that, right?
Well, after my opportunity to work with all of you on Civic and my other life, after I'm late for a budget meeting, I've learned how to play well with you all. We are. Our community expects.
City Manager, you have something you wanted to add?
No, ma'am.
Anybody ready to vote? Yes, Betty.
I just want to say that I will vote for this to have a public hearing, but it doesn't at all indicate that I'll vote for this action.
Sure.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In opposition, 1. It passes. Thank you all. The conversation will continue. Okay.
Are you adjourning us, or?
No, we got this.
She was trying to be helpful there, but just jumped back at the last minute.
Oh, I know.
You like the mayor's helper.
Just so helpful.
Look at you.
Your elves, your Santa.
Committee reports and items of interest from the mayor, city council, and city manager are next, and I was going to take note of the fact that Greg and I are going to be doing a mayor's one-on-one meeting at Wednesday at 5 at the Albertsons on Royal, right? Right. And so, Chris, do you have anything you want to bring to the attention of everybody?
Yes. Probably the main thing I wanted to mention was LCOG held their meeting last Thursday, and just quickly, they're doing so much better. They're talking about the budget. We'll be approving that soon. They brought us from a position of being about $1.5 million in the hole to actually having a small cash, not surplus when you're a government, but to the good, in the black by a little bit. And that is Brenda did that. And Brenda Wilson, as you know, has been doing an incredible amount of work to bring LCOG back and is continuing to do great. One of the things we talked about, though, was most of the COGs around the state have their transit authority as part of the COG organization because so much of what a COG does is around transportation. The ACT, the MPC, those are all very transportation-oriented functions, and the ACT is housed out of LCOG. Lane Transit District has been on the LCOG board as a participant for many, many years, but not as a voting member. And so the discussion came up as whether or not to vote to add LTD as a participant on LCOG. The concern that some folks had was what we've heard many, many times before, is that LTD is not an elected body, but it's an appointed body. So we went to the state regulations to see if there was any prohibition against having a body such as LTD on a COG. Could not find anything at the state level that would prohibit it. It's simply within the LCOG bylaws that it mentions elected representatives, and that probably was not to keep LTD out, but just the way the phrasing was done at the time. But nevertheless, it has created some debate about whether or not LTD should be allowed to join. So at the last meeting, they held a vote to determine whether or not LTD should be allowed if the rest of the details worked out. I abstained because we had not had a chance to talk about it as a council. But the vote on that was to allow LTD to join if the bylaws could be modified to allow them to join. Now, the bylaws have to be ratified by 2/3 of the LCOG members, so there is no guarantee that LTD would be allowed to join because that change still has to be ratified by the LCOG board. But I wanted to bring you up to speed that there is actually movement afoot to allow LTD to be a member of the COG, the payoff being you then have your transit authority as a full-fledged member of the Council of Governments organization, which is the primary transportation body for Lane County. So I'll keep you up to date as to what's going on, but I haven't made any commitments on the part of the Eugene Council that we have not discussed ahead of time, but I'll keep you up to speed.
Thank you for that.
I don't have an item of interest, but I would comment on that and say that I'm interested in more information. If you are going to ask our opinion of you as our representative on that board, what we would want, I'm troubled by the idea that a service provider is also in a policy-making role if they would be. That troubles me a little bit. As they're unelected and the provider of transportation services, to have questions about having capacity to make decisions on transportation policy would seem a bit of a conflict for me. So I'd have to hear more details.
I'll get you more information. I'll get more information on your questions because I do think a good discussion is worthwhile.
All right.
George?
Yeah, the only thing I'd like to bring up is last Monday, and the mayor was there, was the groundbreaking for the Veterans Administration's Eugene Health Care Center. Is going to be its title on Shad Drive and Old Coburg Road. And there were well over 100 people attending. Most of them were veterans. But it's good to see that that's finally getting started. I drove by there yesterday. Unfortunately, they haven't started turning dirt. There's just a little pile of dirt that was brought out for the ceremony. But at least we're getting ready to start the actual construction out there, and it's going to be a great service for the veterans of not only Lane County, but of some of the outlying areas also. So it's something that this community has needed for many, many years, and I'm just, for one, really glad that we're going to be able to provide, not we, but the services that the Veterans Administration can provide for veterans of our community will be here.
Here.
And it's really, I just add to that, that it's really going to expand the services that they can get here, which is going to make a big difference. So,
Right. The only thing they won't be able to do, I believe, if I remember correctly, is they won't have an emergency room per se, and they won't be able to do surgeries. But my understanding is that there's some sort of an agreement between the VA and local hospitals, and whether it's this way here in Eugene, I don't know, but they've got some kind of an agreement where if the surgery does need to be done, the patient can be transferred over to, whether it be Riverbend or McKenzie-Willamette for that needed surgery, and then back when when the patient's ready for the outpatient care.
people are very excited.
Very cool.
Yep, it's very cool. Greg?
Pass, Mayor.
All righty. George?
I don't have anything, Mayor.
Betty?
Oh, I just like to mention that, since mayors were mentioned, that the two mayors are hosting the Art Walk on Friday.
Right.
By
Mayor Lundberg and I are
5:30.
going to be start out at the Fifth Street Market and work our way across town, I think.
Cooperating for the arts.
That's right. That's right. We were reading to kids this morning together, so we're just, moving along. Go ahead.
Just a couple of things. The El Rapa Budget Committee met today, as well as the El Rapa Board, and approved a budget to forward to the full board, and the continuation of Eugene's contribution was much appreciated by staff over there and the board. I know our budget's still yet to be formally approved, but it was in there. And also, I've been participating on the Human Services Commission process for appointing the Poverty and Homelessness Board. That is a new board forming there as a HUD requirement, and our mayor will be part of that board, as well as Mayor Lundberg, and then the chair of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. Right now, that's Commissioner Farr. Are automatic appointments to the board based on their volunteering, and we've got a whole bunch of other slots to fill representing various stakeholders, and we had just a great number of highly qualified folks step up to volunteer to be appointed to the board. So we did a screening process, and we're going to do some interviews this Friday to come to our final proposal in terms of appointments, but very impressed with the number of people who stepped forward and put in applications and would like to be part of this process. So I just wanted to keep you apprised of that.
And I just add one more thing, is that I'm participating in the Habitat for Humanity Women's Build Day on Saturday. So, again, Mayor Lundberg and I were hammers.
Just real briefly, on Saturday, I was at the University of Oregon. They commissioned the first Veterans of Foreign War chapter for any university in the country, which I thought was pretty interesting. As you know, there are a lot of student veterans at the university, and it's also going to be a virtual post, which means that a lot of what they do will be actually online as opposed to physically coming together. So it's just kind of an interesting tidbit there.
Anybody else got anything for the good of the order? Otherwise, we'll be back for our meeting at 7:30. Thank you.
We'll be right back after these commercial messages.